Welcome to Where Are They Now? We reach into the archives of Lenape, Shawnee, Cherokee, and Seneca high schools and invite selected alumni to share memories and fill us in on their career paths after commencement. Since Lenape's first graduating class in 1961, Shawnee's in 1972, Cherokee's in 1978, and Seneca's in 2005, over 68,000 individuals have received diplomas from these four schools. Here now is your host, DJ Dini.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Where Are They Now? Today, we'll be reconnecting with an alum who graduated from Shawnee High School in 2005, Kelly McCormick. Kelly is Manager of Electrical Fabrication for Lockheed Martin Aeronautics in Marietta, Georgia, and she currently lives in Atlanta. Welcome to the show, Kelly.
Hi, good morning, DJ.
Good morning. Let's go back to Shawnee High School. You graduated 2005, not that long ago, even though it probably seems like very long ago. I know that it's a lot of times it seems like it goes a lot quicker than it actually was. You were very involved in a lot of activities, and in particular, a lot that had to do with music. Tell me a little bit about marching band.
So, DJ, I played the trombone in the marching band for 4 years. And my last year, I was the drum major of the marching band, and we had the honor of winning the state's championship the year that I was drum major. So it was a very exciting time for Shawnee Marching Band.
Okay, now I know that's a big transition. Was that something you looked forward to doing from the time you started?
Yes, that is the case. I was not a very good musician, DJ, so I was excited to be moving into a leadership role to not have to play anymore.
Now, were you a solo drum major, or did you have another drum major with you?
I had another drum major with me, Pat O'Keefe, who is now a music teacher in South Jersey at a middle school.
Okay, great. Now, tell me a little bit about marching band specifically, Mr. Rotindo. Tell me about him. He was one of your teachers that had a definite influence on your life.
Correct. So my first 2 years of marching band were under Mr. Barber, and then that was when Seneca High School opened. So Mr. Barber moved to Seneca, and then Mr. Rotindo came in. So both were great leaders, great band instructors, really good at rallying everyone around a cause to win. And Mr. Rotindo really brought in some neat music the years that he was instructing us. It was his first role as a leader of a full band, and he's been running the program since, and they've done very well.
Okay, now moving on to some of your academics, Miss Christine Lorenz, a history teacher, she had an effect on your life.
She did. So Miss Lorenz used to have us really experience U.S. history. She would have us write songs about different events in history. So I remember around Christmas time, we were learning about the Battle of Thames. And we wrote a whole song to chestnuts roasting on an open fire. And I still know about the Battle of Thames because of that song that she had us write.
So she had a lot of interesting teaching methods, I guess, that had a positive effect in how you learned?
Absolutely.
Okay, now you were involved in math club. Tell me a little bit about math club.
So, yeah, I was very much into math and science going through school. And math club was interesting because it wasn't very social. You would just have to go and take a test. So we would all travel to one location and sit down and take a test and see who would do the best. But it helped us, the studying for it, to kind of rally as a team.
Now, did a lot of that carry over to science club as well?
Yes. So a lot of very similar. And I always thought that math club and science club were like they are on TV, where you have, a buzzer and a team of people, kind of like Family Feud style, where, everybody's buzzing in. No, alas, it was just let's travel and all take a test together. But it certainly helped us, fill in the gaps of, the practicality of what we were learning in class.
I'm sure it probably helped when you left high school and went to college as well to have all that test taking under your belt, right?
Yes, for sure.
Okay, now a couple other clubs you were in, Renaissance Club?
And so Renaissance Club, a lot of volunteer activity. So Renaissance Club actually introduced me to what would end up being my major in college. So I was volunteering with the Special Olympics bowling in South Jersey, and during that event, it was at a big bowling alley that had, 30 lanes. The woman who was coordinating that event, actually, when I met her, she was coordinating all the high schoolers from different high schools. And it turns out, I asked her what she did for a living, and she said that she manages all of the baggage at the Philadelphia International Airport, and that she makes sure that it gets to you as quickly as possible. So when that was just so fascinating to me, that that was a job to make sure that baggage moved so quickly. And she told me it was called industrial engineering, which led to my researching more about that field. And that's how I ended up going to school for industrial engineering.
So once you kind of had that going in motion as far as the baggage and how that was, routed and whatnot, you kind of remembered something else from your life that said, hey, maybe this is something I'm really interested in based on things in the past?
Yeah, so industrial engineering was invented during the Industrial Revolution, when we as a country were trying to figure out how do we, make cars available to everyone in the whole country. So instead of just building one car at a time, we can put it on an assembly line. So it's really about how do we build things as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible. And so once I discovered this when I was 17 or 18, my mom reminded me of a story from when I was growing up. We lived in Medford. And in the Hoot Owl neighborhood, there's one long stretch of road. It's Christopher Mill Road, and you drop off students at each of the entrances to their neighborhoods along Christopher Mill Road. And when I was 7 or 8 years old, I wrote a letter to the bus depot asking them to reroute the bus route, because we went and took the person who lived furthest away from the school home first, and then dropped off all of the students who lived in the neighborhoods along Christopher Mill. And so I wrote up an analysis of like, hey, the number of kid minutes it's taking us to drive, you're holding way more people on the bus for longer. You should drop us off first and then the furthest person away, so that it optimizes all of our time of who's on the bus. So the bus depot didn't go for it, because they don't like making a left off of Christopher Mill Road onto Taunton.
But you were what, 5? How old were you when you did this?
I was like 7.
Okay, 7. So I mean, at least you had all the other parts right. The left-hand turn, you're not thinking about that when you're 7 years old, I assume.
Right. So yeah, there are other factors that go into it, like safety, but so there should be like a genie that appears, or someone who's like, you should learn about industrial engineering, 7-year-old. But alas, it took me until I was almost in college to learn that was a field.
Now, when you were on this Boeing Special Olympics trip, was that a junior year or senior year?
Junior year.
Junior year. So then you went into senior year knowing that that's what you wanted to do. So what schools did you look at as you prepared during senior year?
It was really important to my dad that I understood that you not only need to go to a school for what you're learning, but also the environment. So my dad and I, in between junior and senior year, went on a lot of road trips to different types of schools. So we went and spent a little bit of time in Philadelphia, a little bit of time at TCNJ. Do we want a rural school? Do we want to live in a city? So I kind of narrowed it down to, I want to live near or in a city. So the 4 schools that I narrowed my search down to were industrial engineering schools that are in a city. And that brought us to the University of Pittsburgh, where I ended up attending, Northeastern in Boston, the University of Maryland outside of DC, and then Rutgers, in the event that was kind of my, hey, if it doesn't work out, going outside of the state. And so I fell in love with Pitt when I came to visit, and then was really grateful that all of the schools ended up to be roughly around the same financial obligation. So then Pitt it was, and it had been a great time since.
So you were at Pitt from 2005 to 2009. Any memories from being at Pitt other than, general studies and, pursuing your degree?
So I was pretty involved at Pitt. I was the president of the Institute of Industrial Engineers, as well as being in a series of extracurriculars, like giving tours of the engineering school. There are a series of fraternities and sororities that are a part of the engineering school as well. So I was in the social sorority Phi Sigma Rho. And I also branched a little bit into the business school where I was part of an investment network called the Women's Investment Network, so WIN. And we would invest in different publicly traded companies once a month. People would pitch what companies they thought we should invest in. And so I got to learn a little bit about business as well.
Now, were you guys investing actual money, or was it more of like a classroom type of thing? Were you experimenting with?
We were investing actual money. We had some students from the law school write up the paperwork for us to make sure that we were doing it fair, but everyone would give $50 a month into the kitty that we would all invest.
How'd you do?
We did pretty well. I ended up pulling out of WinPit right before the financial crash in 2008.
Wow.
So it was good timing to be leaving that club. So yeah, we ended up doing very well.
Yeah, you're lucky you weren't like the class of '06.
Correct.
Exactly. Now, you were also the Industrial Engineering Student of the Year in 2009.
I was.
What does that mean?
So I shared that title with an industrial engineer who ended up actually going to work for the Boston Red Sox and be a statistician for the Red Sox. And really, that's just for involvement in industrial engineering. So my role, so I was the president of the Institute of Industrial Engineers, and we hosted a conference of the region. So 10 schools from all around the Northeast came to visit Pitt, and we had a 3-day conference. And we were able to raise about $25,000 from companies in the area. So I think that was kind of the correlation that led to the Student of the Year award there.
Huge accomplishment. So you finish up at college. Anything of note before graduation?
Pitt has a nice program that's called a co-op, in which you rotate between work and school. So I worked for 2 years while I was in school as an industrial engineer for a company called MedRad, and they make medical equipment. If you go get a CAT scan or an MRI, lots of times the physician will request that contrast is injected so that
like
they
a
can
dye, like type of thing.
Yep. And so they make those injectors. So they will partner with GE and sell those injectors as part of an MRI or CAT scan suite. So I was working doing capacity planning for them for 2 years while I was in school. And so I would work for 4 months, go to school for 4 months, rotate back and forth. It was really valuable to be able to get that experience before I had my degree.
So it's almost like an internship, but you were paid to do this?
I was paid to do this. It worked. It made school a lot more fun because I had some money too. So that was nice.
Okay, so you finish that up, you graduate. Take us to the next step.
So sure, I was graduating. I graduated because of that. It was a 4.5-year program at Pitt. I graduated in December of 2009. And so that was right after so the company that I was working for couldn't hire me full time because they were having some financial troubles. It was right after the end of 2008. So it was a rough time to be looking for a job. But I had been through the Institute of Industrial Engineers doing a lot of networking. So I have my whole spreadsheet of companies that I was and who I had contacted there. So I spent a lot of time my senior year looking for work. And I knew that I wanted to work for a company that had a leadership development program because I didn't think that I wanted to be behind a desk all the time. I wanted to move into a leadership role. So and I also wanted to work, so the defense industry first was pretty sheltered from the impact of the stock market in 2008. So good area to be going into, but also I have a lot of cousins. 6 of my cousins are in various branches of the armed service. So I wanted to move into a role of production around aircraft. To be helping support our troops across the world. So kind of playing my role there. So I had known some people through networking that worked for Lockheed Martin, and they helped me get an interview into a leadership development program. And so going into my last semester of school, I had a job offer to go work for Lockheed.
Okay, now this sounds like, for somebody watching, a pretty big jump. You go from doing a job that had to do with contrast injections for MRIs and CAT scans to like war planes and things used in the armed services. Like, it seems like a very broad type of, career. Is that something that you thought about, or is it just like, it's the same type of work regardless of what you're working with?
Yeah, so one of the things that we say is a part is a part.
Oh, okay.
So in an assembly environment, I can have an assembly line in a clean room that is making syringes, or I can have an assembly line of F-22 planes. The concepts of how do we do that efficiently are the same. It's just a lot harder on a warplane. And I know my coworkers now would, if they saw this, they would be very mad at me for saying that. Because I often say the opposite, that this is different. We're in aircraft production now. But so going into it, I wasn't afraid, because I was like, well, this is another process that I have to work to understand. In retrospect, I probably should have been a little bit afraid. It's far more complicated than I thought it would be going into it. But that was just kind of what they teach in industrial engineering school is, just assume it's a widget, whatever it is. It's just a more complicated widget that you're building.
All right, so now you've been there for what, about 7, 8 years?
Correct.
Okay, so some of the things you've done while you've been there in those 7, 8 years.
So I was blessed enough to join the Marietta, Georgia team. So it's a plant just north of Atlanta, and the plant here was built at the height of World War II in 13 months, and it is one of the biggest manufacturing facilities in the country. They were building bombers, and they were rolling aircraft out of the building as they were still building the building. So it's 76 football fields across. When I hired on, I was working on C-5 aircraft, which are the large cargo aircraft. The only customer is the U.S. Air Force, and we were refurbishing them so that they could fly instead of from here into theater and have to hit a land bridge for maintenance and refuel. They could now fly all the way into theater into Turkey. So we're doing a heavy mod on them, and we're about to wrap up that program. But that was my first job, was working on the biggest aircraft that the Air Force has.
Yeah, that's quite a change.
And, yeah. So I worked there. So it was a leadership development program, so I rotated around. So I worked there for 6 months, and then I worked, probably the coolest job I've ever had was working on the F-22, which is the most advanced fifth generation fighter. We delivered 195 of them out of Marietta final assembly, and I was a quality engineer on the flight line, so I was making sure we were okay to fly. So I did that for 6 months, and then I moved to Washington, D.C. and did some business development for us in Washington, D.C. for some of our civilian programs. So I was selling FAA weather software.
Okay.
And then I really missed the planes, so I moved back. So I've been back in Georgia since 2012, working on the C-5 program again, and now I work on the C-130 program. And so C-130, we've been building since 1954. It's our workhorse for the Air Force. It's a propeller cargo aircraft that can do things like land on dirt runways. And it can do really short takeoff and short landings. So it's very tactical for delivery of goods and troops in theater. So my team currently, we build all of the wiring that goes into the aircraft. Okay. So if you think about an assembly line, if you have, we have how many miles of wire, 46 miles of wire go into a C-130.
Wow.
So you could be on an assembly line stringing each one of those wires, but it would take a really long time. So it would be really slow for the production line to move. So instead, we build all the wires in a back shop off the assembly line, and then they just kind of snap into the aircraft. So I have under my sphere of control right now, we have a team of 200 assemblers who build all of the wiring, and a lot of them have come from maintenance type roles in the Air Force or in the Army or in the Navy. We've got a really patriotic work environment, and a lot of folks who are very good with their hands to be able to do intricate wiring work for the aircraft.
Now, that's obviously very early on in the production stage because wiring goes inside. What's a typical day for you like?
So typical day, I get into work at 5:30 in the morning. Production starts at 6:30, so I make sure I know all the numbers from the day before. And then I walk to each of the areas and see what kind of issues we have. So that's the difference between a syringe and an aircraft is that your supply chain for an aircraft has many, many things that can go wrong, as, you know, hey, this part's late. Hey, we had this issue with getting conformity from one of our suppliers. So a lot of my day is spent making sure that we're working through parts issues. And every day is a very exciting challenge. And we measure how well the day went by the number of high fives that we get to give on the team.
So I assume that the actual job doesn't change that much from a day-to-day basis because you're building the same thing. It's a lot of the same thing based on, like you said, what obstacles you're running into and problem solving and that type of thing, right?
Right. So the things that change about the day are the configuration of aircraft that we're building. So we're working on our first set of sales to a non-military customer. So we're working on with the FAA right now to get approval to sell to companies like Bravo Industries that's in the Amazon in Brazil. So there's a lot of need for being able to land when you don't have a runway when you're flying in Brazil. So if we're going to sell to a civilian company, we need FAA certification. So there's a lot of intricacies of, hey, I don't know how that works. Let me go understand the FAA processes now.
Right.
Or, hey, we're going to be outfitting this C-130 so that it can do terrain follow, which is where it flies between, in valleys so that it has the radar system so that it doesn't it's basically using the mountains around it as radar cover. So if we're going to be outfitting a C-130 to do that, we better learn about the engineering that goes into that and how we can build the wiring for it. So it changes based on who the customer is that we're selling to.
Okay. Now, you went to school during working there as well?
Correct. So I had the opportunity for Lockheed to support me in getting my MBA. And so while I was working, I went from 2012 to 2014, I took night classes at Emory University, which is just downtown in Atlanta, to get my MBA.
What made you want to do that? Where would that lead you?
So I knew that I didn't want to stay in industrial engineering as a person who kind of runs analysis. I wanted to get out and lead. So because of that, I thought it would be good to go and get a master's in how does the business really work, not just the production numbers, but how do all of the financial numbers work. So I spent a lot of time in finance classes learning about how do we account for different folks' pay, different supply chain costs, and how does that impact the final cost of an aircraft. Okay.
So now more to your actual life outside of work. What are some of the things that you like to do, hobbies, activities?
So this kind of ties back a little bit to when I was at Shawnee. So after I left Emory, after I graduated with my MBA, I was thinking about, hey, okay, now I'm going to have every night of the week free. What am I going to fill this time with? And so I was like, I better fill it with something or else I'll just watch TV all the time. So I took a couple improv classes. And that was 3 years ago now. So improv is
For comedy,
like the TV,
right?
yeah. So like the TV show Whose Line Is It Anyway?
Right.
So it's that type of, performing where you don't know what you're walking into. You just kind of have to react. And so I started taking improv classes, and now I actually improvise with a couple troupes 3 nights a week. So when I come home from work, I'm often, let me take off the production hat, put on a let's just go have fun hat. It ties back a little bit to high school because it reminds me of just hanging out and being silly in high school. The troupe that I improvise with is out of a theater called High Wire Comedy Club. It's nice because improv's kind of like up and coming in Atlanta right now, whereas in Chicago and New York, there's already a big following. Atlanta is like we're kind of newer to the improv scene, so I get to be on stage more often than I would be if I lived in a different town.
Now, do you see any of that like crossing over into your job? Do you become more quick-witted when you're at work, that type of thing?
Actually, so this is the plug that I have for improv to everyone at work is that it makes, so first it's very therapeutic, right? You leave work and you've had a stressful day, and you get to go think about something completely unrelated, right? Where you can't be worried about the stresses of the day, or if you are worried about the stresses of the day, maybe you just make a character who needs to vent, right?
Right.
But also I bring a lot of improv to work, where, hey, we're kicking off a meeting that I'm worried isn't going to go so well. Let's all do an improv warm-up activity. So my team thinks I'm a little crazy, but after they kind of got used to it, they're like, oh yeah, we should all just play for a minute before we start this meeting.
That's great. So tell me a little bit about your family.
So I live here in Atlanta. My boyfriend of almost 4 years. We live in a townhouse just in the northern part of Atlanta, and we have a wonderful Bernese mountain dog named Teddy. Back home, my parents, they left Medford and moved to my grandmother's former house in Brigantine. And I have a younger brother who also graduated from Shawnee, and he lives in Philadelphia.
Okay. Now, put you on the spot a little bit, going back to high school. What's one thing from high school you would like to do again?
So,
there's a difference between doing it over and doing it again. You know what I mean?
Yes.
You could pick either.
I don't know that I would do anything over. Everything kind of worked out to, if it didn't go well, I learned from it. But something I'd like to do again, I think about the prom and how when we went to the prom, I left prom and I was like, that is the most fun I will ever have. And how wrong I was, but but that was like a good place to be, right? Like
right.
That is we are all just having so much fun. And then, I think back to that version of Kelly a lot because boy, was she pretty naive to what fun was. But
right.
I would go back to the prom, just that all friends hanging out and just having a blast.
Well, I've really enjoyed talking to you today. Thank you for joining us and taking time out of your schedule to talk to us.
I really appreciate the opportunity, DJ. Thank you.
Thank you. We've been talking to Shawnee alum Kelly McCormick, manager of electrical fabrication for Lockheed Martin Aeronautics in Marietta, Georgia. Thank you for joining us, and please join us next time for more alumni interviews on Where Are They Now?